The turbulence hit just as we began our final descent into Atlanta, jolting the entire cabin and rattling the overhead bins. I gripped the armrest, taking a slow, deep breath to steady my racing heart. My name is Sienna. I am 34 years old, and I was flying back to the city I used to call home for one specific reason. I was attending my divorce mediation. For the past 3 years, I had quietly built a highly successful career as a forensic accountant in New York, running away from a marriage that had drained me both emotionally and financially. My husband's family had always viewed my working-class background as a stain on their impeccable reputation, never missing an opportunity to humiliate me. Today was supposed to be the end of that nightmare, a clean break from their constant psychological abuse. I was exhausted, running on barely 3 hours of sleep, but my mind was sharper than ever. The sudden drop caused the man sitting in the aisle seat next to me to lose his grip on a thick stack of manila folders. Papers scattered across the floor, sliding under seats as the plane leveled out. He was an elderly black gentleman with silver hair, dressed in a sharply tailored charcoal suit that commanded immediate respect. He sighed, reaching down with a silver-handled wooden cane, struggling to gather the documents. "Please let me help you," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt and slipping out of my seat. I knelt on the carpeted floor and began gathering the scattered pages. As I stacked them, a few paragraphs caught my eye. "You have a keen eye," the gentleman said, his voice deep and resonant. "It is quite fascinating," I replied, handing the organized stack back to him. The man raised his eyebrows, a look of genuine surprise and amusement crossing his weathered face. He carefully placed the folders into his leather briefcase and looked at me with newfound interest. "It is very rare to meet someone who understands the nuances of federal corporate law on a commercial flight. You must be in the industry." "I am a forensic accountant," I explained, settling back into my seat as the seatbelt sign illuminated. "I track hidden money for a living. People try to bury their assets in complicated legal jargon, but numbers never lie. They always leave a trail." "Indeed they do." He smiled warmly, offering his hand. "My name is Elias Thorne. It is a pleasure to meet someone who respects the absolute truth of a paper trail." "Sienna," I replied, shaking his hand. We spent the remainder of the flight discussing the intricacies of corporate fraud and legal accountability. Elias was brilliant, asking piercing questions that challenged my expertise. When the plane finally landed and taxied to the gate, he retrieved his briefcase and turned to me. "What brings a sharp forensic accountant back to Atlanta?" Elias asked gently. "Unfortunately, personal business." I sighed, checking the time on my phone. "I have a divorce mediation at the Supreme Court building downtown. I am bracing myself for a very unpleasant afternoon." "I happen to be heading to that exact courthouse for a meeting. The traffic in this city is unforgiving. Please allow me to share my car with you. It is the least I can do after you saved my documents." I hesitated, not wanting to impose, but the genuine warmth in his offer won me over. We walked through the bustling airport terminal together, and an elegant black sedan was waiting for us at the curb. The ride into the city was smooth and quiet. I stared out the window, watching the familiar Atlanta skyline emerge against the bright morning sky. My stomach tightened into a cold knot as we approached the grand marble-columned courthouse. This was it, the moment I had been dreading for months. I was about to face my estranged husband, Marcus, and the toxic family that had spent years treating me like an unworthy outsider. Elias and I walked up the wide stone steps and entered the vast, echoing lobby of the courthouse. The marble floors reflected the harsh overhead lights. Before I could even find the directory board to locate the mediation room, a loud, grating voice echoed across the open space. "Well, look who finally decided to show up. I was beginning to think you were going to hide in New York forever." I stopped in my tracks. Standing near a bank of elevators blocking my path was Marcus. He wore a custom navy suit, looking every bit the arrogant real estate CEO he pretended to be. Beside him stood Trent, his white brother-in-law. Trent was a corporate lawyer at one of the most elite law firms in Atlanta, and he never let anyone forget it. He was a tall, imposing man, with a permanent sneer radiating the kind of aggressive entitlement that made my skin crawl. Elias stood quietly slightly behind me, observing the interaction without saying a word. Trent stepped forward, invading my personal space. He did not bother with a greeting. He unzipped his leather portfolio, pulled out a heavily redacted, ridiculously thin document, and slammed it down onto a glass coffee table in the center of the lobby. The sound echoed sharply, drawing curious glances from passing attorneys and clerks. "Sign the paper, Sienna," Trent demanded, his tone dripping with absolute contempt. "Marcus is being incredibly generous today. There is a check for $10,000 waiting for you. Take the money, sign away your claims to his company, and go back to whatever miserable little cubicle you crawled out of." I looked down at the insulting settlement offer, feeling the familiar sting of their disrespect. They really thought I was still the same quiet, intimidated woman who had left this city. They had no idea who I had become, and they had absolutely no clue what I was hiding in my briefcase. Trent tapped a gold fountain pen against the glass table, the clicking echoing through the courthouse lobby. He leaned closer, his towering frame casting a shadow over me. He wanted to make me feel small. He wanted me to shrink back, to apologize for breathing the same air as his elite, manicured family. "Are you deaf, Sienna?" Trent sneered, his blue eyes narrowing with amusement. "I said pick up the pen and sign. You are out of your depth here. My hourly rate at Sterling and Vance is more than you make in a month, punching numbers at the firm you work for now. You are just a glorified calculator. If you drag this out, I will bury you in so much litigation that your grandchildren will be paying off the legal fees. You will walk away with absolutely nothing." I stared at the pen, then up at Trent's face. He was so accustomed to bullying his way through corporate boardrooms that he believed a loud voice and an expensive suit equaled ultimate power. He thought he held all the cards. Before I could respond, my mother-in-law, Eleanor, stepped out from behind Marcus. She adjusted the collar of her tweed blazer, her styled hair catching the fluorescent light overhead. Eleanor had spent her entire life curating her image among the Atlanta elite, hosting charity galas and attending high society luncheons. To her, I was an infection that had temporarily compromised her perfect family tree. "Do not test our patience today, Sienna," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with southern charm. "Trent is doing you a favor by even offering this settlement. We all know you came into this marriage with empty pockets and a cheap wardrobe from the south side of town. You should be down on your knees thanking us for giving you a taste of how respectable people live." She crossed her arms, looking me up and down with utter disgust. My son worked himself to the bone building his empire from the ground up. He spent the last 8 years securing contracts, developing properties, and carrying the financial weight of this entire family. And what did you do? You sat around balancing petty cash drawers. You contributed absolutely nothing of value to his business or this marriage. Marcus nodded in agreement, adjusting his watch to ensure I saw it. It was the same watch I had bought for his 30th birthday, back when I still believed his lies. "Mom is right," Marcus added, attempting to sound like a weary, benevolent victim. "I built my company with my own sweat and blood. I gave you a home in Buckhead. I paid for your lifestyle while you worked those low-paying accounting jobs just to feel independent. I am willing to give you the $10,000 because I pity you. Take the money and start over somewhere else. Jessica and I just want to move on peacefully." Hearing him casually mention his mistress Jessica was supposed to break me. They expected the tears to fall. They anticipated a hysterical breakdown right there in the courthouse lobby. Eleanor already had a triumphant smirk forming on her lips, ready to watch me crumble into a sobbing mess. Instead, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, sharp clarity. I did not cry. I did not shake. I reached out and picked up the heavy gold pen Trent had tossed onto the table. Trent smiled, assuming he had won. Marcus let out a sigh of relief. I looked at the signature line on the settlement document, then flipped the pen upside down and slid it deliberately back across the glass table. It hit Trent's briefcase with a soft thud. "I am not signing anything," I said, my voice steady and unyielding. Trent's smile vanished instantly. His face flushed red. "Are you completely insane? I just told you what will happen if you fight me on this. I will drain every single cent you have." "You cannot drain an ocean with a teaspoon, Trent," I replied evenly, meeting his furious gaze without blinking. "You call me a glorified calculator? That is ironic, coming from a man who drafts contracts filled with illegal confidentiality clauses designed to hide marital assets. This document is a complete joke. It is poorly written, legally unenforceable, and frankly, embarrassing for a senior corporate attorney." Eleanor gasped, loudly stepping forward, as if preparing to physically strike me. "How dare you speak to Trent that way? You ungrateful, arrogant little brat! You have no idea who you are dealing with." "Oh, I know exactly who I am dealing with," I countered, my voice rising just enough to command the space. "I am dealing with a family of parasites who think they can rewrite history to suit their own narrative. You claim Marcus built his real estate empire from the ground up? You claim I contributed nothing while he carried the financial weight?" I turned my attention directly to my husband, who suddenly looked very uncomfortable under my intense scrutiny. "Marcus, why do you not tell your mother the truth about how your precious company stayed afloat during your first 3 years? Why do you not explain how you secured those massive commercial contracts when your credit score was in the gutter and banks refused to lend you a single dime?" Marcus swallowed hard, looking away. "Shut up, Sienna. Do not do this here." "Do what?" Trent interrupted, aggressively stepping between us. "She is bluffing. She is trying to buy time because she is broke and desperate. She is a nobody." I stood my ground today, absolutely refusing to let the arrogant white lawyer intimidate me in a city my own ancestors helped build. "I am not bluffing, Trent," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "I am simply refusing to be bullied by a man who uses his law degree as a weapon against women he perceives as weak. You really want a war? I brought an entire arsenal." Trent let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed across the marble walls of the courthouse lobby. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his expensive phone, his thumb hovering over the bright screen. "That is enough," Trent said, his voice dripping with absolute venom. "I am done entertaining this pathetic display. I am calling building security to have you physically removed from the premises. When you are sitting in a holding cell for trespassing and causing a public disturbance, maybe then you will finally understand that you do not get to make empty threats against people like us." Marcus smirked proudly, crossing his arms over his broad chest. Eleanor sighed dramatically, adjusting her designer handbag. "Security will not be necessary today, Mr. Harrison." The voice was quiet, yet it carried an undeniable weight that cut through the tension like a sharp blade. We all turned immediately. Elias Thorne stepped forward from the dark shadow of a massive marble pillar, his silver-handled wooden cane tapping rhythmically against the polished stone floor. Trent opened his mouth, likely prepared to unleash a barrage of cruel insults at the elderly man, interrupting his moment of power. But the malicious words died in his throat. I watched the incredible transformation happen in real time. The arrogant smirk vanished from Trent's face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. The color drained completely from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and pale. His hand, still tightly holding the phone, began to tremble visibly. "Professor Thorne," Trent stammered, his loud voice reducing to a pathetic squeak. "I had absolutely no idea you were here today. What an unexpected honor, sir." Marcus frowned deeply, stepping forward. "Trent, what is going on? Who is this old man?" "Shut your mouth, Marcus," Trent hissed angrily, his eyes wide with sheer panic. He frantically shoved his phone back into his pocket and practically bowed at the waist. "Please forgive my ignorant brother-in-law, Your Honor. He does not understand who he is speaking to right now." Eleanor, always hyper-aware of elite social hierarchies, instantly recognized the massive shift in power. Her condescending glare melted into a look of cautious calculation. "Allow me to introduce myself," Elias said gently, his piercing gaze fixed coldly on Trent. "I am Elias Thorne, former judge for the United States Court of Appeals and currently the senior founding partner of Sterling and Vance, the very law firm where this young man is desperately attempting to secure a junior partnership." Eleanor gasped softly, her manicured hand flying to her pearl necklace. She knew the legendary name. Everyone in the elite Atlanta social circles knew the Thorne family legacy. They were the undisputed royalty of the local legal community. Trent looked like he was about to faint on the spot. "Sir, I can explain the situation. This woman is a hostile party in a highly sensitive family matter. She is completely unstable. We were just trying to finalize a simple, generous divorce settlement to protect my client." Elias completely ignored Trent's frantic groveling. He stepped past the trembling lawyer and approached the glass coffee table. He picked up the heavily redacted settlement offer Trent had slammed down earlier. Elias pulled a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket, slipped them on, and began to carefully read the document. The silence in the grand lobby was suffocating. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, looking to his mother for guidance, but Eleanor was completely frozen in place. "A simple, generous settlement," Elias repeated softly. His eyes scanning the printed pages, he let out a low, disappointed chuckle. "Mr. Harrison, I taught you advanced contract law during your second year at Yale. I expected you to retain at least a fraction of the strict ethical standards I drilled into your head. This document is not a legal settlement. It is a predatory ambush, and a remarkably poorly drafted one at that." "Sir, please," Trent begged, desperately, his hands practically shaking. "The terms were drafted to expedite the separation process smoothly. Marcus just wanted a clean break from her." "Do not insult my intelligence," Elias snapped harshly, his commanding voice echoing loudly. "Clause 4 explicitly demands that Sienna forfeit any right to formal financial discovery. Clause 7 includes a blanket non-disclosure agreement carrying a $1 million penalty if she ever discusses her husband's corporate business practices. You are deliberately attempting to use my prestigious law firm's name on the official letterhead to strong-arm a woman into signing away her legal right to audit marital assets." Elias took a deliberate step closer to Trent, forcing the taller man to visibly cower. "This contract is packed with illegal confidentiality clauses designed specifically to hide financial crimes," Elias continued, his tone absolutely ruthless. "You are deliberately exploiting a power dynamic to force an unconscionable agreement. If this garbage was presented in front of any competent judge in the state of Georgia, it would be thrown out immediately, and you would be sanctioned heavily for predatory legal practices." Eleanor stepped forward quickly, plastering on a fake, polite smile. "Judge Thorne, surely there is a misunderstanding. Marcus is a respected pillar of the community. We only wanted to protect his hard-earned real estate company from being dismantled by someone who contributed absolutely nothing to its success." Elias turned his sharp gaze to Eleanor. "Madam, I do not care about your son's alleged status and your exclusive social clubs. I care deeply about the integrity of the law. And right now, I am looking at a blatant attempt to commit fraud through legal coercion." Elias ripped the settlement document in half, right down the middle. He dropped the torn pieces onto the glass table. "You have completely disgraced Sterling and Vance today, Mr. Harrison," Elias said directly to Trent. "You foolishly tried to bring a knife to a gunfight without realizing the brilliant woman you are threatening is holding the launch codes." Trent looked completely destroyed his career. Marcus shifted his weight, running a hand over his groomed beard. He recognized that Trent had completely lost control of the narrative, so he attempted to salvage the situation by playing the victim. He turned his attention to Elias, adopting a tone of exhausted patience that he usually reserved for dealing with difficult clients. "Your Honor, please excuse my wife's behavior," Marcus said smoothly, gesturing toward me with open palms. "Sienna has been under an immense amount of psychological distress lately. The divorce has been hard on her mental health. I am only offering this settlement because I care about her well-being. I built Marcus Realty Group from nothing, and I have provided her with a life of absolute luxury. I just want to make sure she has a little something to land on her feet, even though she brought absolutely zero equity into this marriage. I am just trying to be generous." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that cut through his rehearsed speech. The sheer audacity of this man was absolutely staggering to witness. He had spent years standing at church podiums and country club dinners accepting awards as a self-made visionary, while I sat quietly in the shadows, balancing his desperately overdrawn ledgers. "Generous?" I asked, my voice ringing clearly across the lobby. "You want to talk about generosity and equity, Marcus? Let us talk about who actually funded the foundation of your precious empire." I unclasped the heavy brass lock of my leather briefcase. I reached inside and pulled out a heavy 3-inch thick binder secured with tight rubber bands. I lifted it high enough for everyone to see before slamming it down onto the glass coffee table right next to the shredded remains of Trent's pathetic settlement offer. The heavy thud made Eleanor jump backwards in sheer surprise. "Open it, Marcus," I demanded, pointing at the black binder. "Or maybe Trent should open it. Since he is such a meticulous corporate attorney, he will surely appreciate a perfectly organized paper trail." Trent stared at the binder as if it were a live explosive. Marcus swallowed hard, a flicker of genuine uncertainty breaking through his arrogant facade. He did not move a single muscle, refusing to look directly at the documents. "Since you are both suddenly paralyzed, I will summarize the contents for the audience," I said, stepping closer to the table. Inside this binder are 5 years of fully authenticated bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and corporate deposit logs. These documents show a direct financial pipeline from my personal investment accounts into the operating accounts of Marcus Realty Group. Eleanor frowned deeply, her meticulously painted lips pressing into a thin, angry line. "What nonsense are you spewing now, Sienna? My son started his company with a small loan from our family and grew it through sheer brilliance. You never had a dime to your name." "Your family loaned him $50,000, Eleanor," I corrected sharply, looking straight into my mother-in-law's eyes. "That money dried up within his first 6 months of operations because he spent half of it on a country club membership to impress his fraternity brothers. When he was facing bankruptcy during his first year, when the banks laughed him out of their offices, who do you think bailed him out?" I tapped the top of the thick binder twice. "I did," I stated, my voice echoing with undeniable authority. "I liquidated my own private stock portfolio. I transferred $300,000 to cover his initial commercial development bond. 2 years later, when his lead contractor threatened to walk off the Midtown project due to unpaid invoices, I wired another $400,000 directly to payroll. Over the course of our marriage, I quietly injected $1.2 million of my own money into his failing business, just to keep the lights on and the creditors away." The silence that followed was absolute. Elias Thorne raised a singular eyebrow, watching the unfolding scene with a deeply fascinated expression. Marcus looked as though the floor had suddenly dropped out from beneath him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He knew every single document in that binder was real. He knew I possessed the exact dates, the routing numbers, and the corresponding emails where he begged me to save him from financial ruin. I had kept every frantic text message he sent in the middle of the night, pleading for another cash injection so he would not lose face in front of his wealthy country club friends. Eleanor, however, refused to surrender her polished narrative. She possessed a terrifying ability to warp reality to protect her family's social standing. In her mind, the pristine image of the prominent black elite family in Atlanta was far more important than the truth. The shock on her face quickly hardened into a mask of pure defensive fury. She smoothed down her designer jacket, raising her chin high. "You are a manipulative, calculating snake," Eleanor hissed, stepping protectively in front of her son. "If you put money into my son's business, it was your duty as his wife. You lived in the beautiful home he provided. You wore the clothes his status afforded you. Any money you contributed was simply paying your fair share for the privilege of being part of this family. You do not get to demand a refund just because your marriage failed." I stared at her, marveling at the sheer delusion required to frame $1 million bailout as paying my fair share. "It was not a gift, Eleanor," I replied coldly. "It was an undocumented equity injection. And since Marcus refused to sign a formal partnership agreement back then, insisting that keeping my name off the paperwork would protect me from liability, those funds legally constitute a massive marital asset debt. I do not just want a refund, I want my rightful equity in the company I financially built." The sharp clatter of designer heels against the polished marble floor announced Jada long before she actually spoke. Marcus's older sister marched into our circle, her face twisted into a mask of pure indignation. Jada had always treated me like an unwanted charity case, constantly boasting about her position on various Atlanta charity boards, while quietly living off her brother's supposed wealth. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest, her diamond rings catching the harsh lobby lighting. "You are a pathological liar, Sienna!" Jada screamed, her voice echoing loudly enough to make several passing attorneys turn and stare. "You did not build anything! Marcus built that company with his own bare hands, and my husband Trent legally structured it to be an impenetrable fortress. You are just trying to steal from us because you are jealous of Jessica. You fabricated every single piece of paper in that ridiculous binder just to extort money from my brother." I looked at Jada, feeling a wave of absolute exhaustion wash over me at her predictable arrogance. She was so desperate to protect the illusion of her family's flawless financial empire that she would blindly defend Marcus against undeniable physical evidence. "Fabricated?" I asked, tapping the thick binder resting on the glass table. "Jada, these are certified bank records. They include official routing numbers from my personal accounts, transferring massive sums directly to Marcus Realty Group. You can verify them with a single phone call to the bank manager, assuming your brother has not already drained those accounts completely dry." Marcus stepped forward, his face red with sudden panic. "Do not listen to her, Jada. She is completely out of her mind. I have never taken a single dime from her." Trent, who had been standing frozen in terror under the watchful gaze of Judge Elias Thorne, suddenly saw an opportunity to salvage his ruined pride. His eyes darted from the binder on the table to my calm expression. The arrogant corporate lawyer calculated that if he could discredit my evidence, he might still save his career and impress his legendary boss. Trent straightened his expensive tie, thrust his chest forward, and adopted his most aggressive courtroom posture. "Let us examine the actual facts here," Trent announced, his voice booming across the lobby. "Jada is absolutely right. These documents are either complete forgeries or they represent a massive federal crime. Sienna, you are a basic entry-level clerk. You manage low-level payroll accounts. You do not have executive clearance, nor do you hold a seat on the board of directors for Marcus Realty Group. Trent pointed a threatening finger at the binder. If those financial documents are real, then you bypassed encrypted corporate firewalls to obtain them. That means you hacked into my client's secure servers. You committed corporate espionage to steal proprietary financial data to use as leverage in a petty domestic dispute. That is not just a civil violation, Sienna. That is a federal felony. Eleanor gasped in dramatic horror, clutching her chest as if she had just been physically assaulted. "A thief!" she declared loudly, looking at me with profound disgust. "We welcomed a common thief into our home. I always knew your working-class roots would eventually show your true criminal nature. You tried to rob my son blind." "She is dangerous," Jada chimed in, stepping closer to Trent for protection. "Trent, you have to do something. She cannot be allowed to walk around, stealing from prominent Black businesses. She is trying to ruin our family legacy with stolen information." Trent pulled his premium smartphone from his suit jacket pocket and unlocked the screen, holding it up like a weapon. His smug demeanor returned in full force, fueled by the desperate hope that he had finally cornered me. "I am giving you exactly 10 seconds to pack up your stolen garbage and walk out of this courthouse, Sienna," Trent warned, his tone vicious and commanding. "If you do not take that $10,000 settlement right now and disappear from our lives forever, I am dialing the authorities. I have contacts at the district attorney's office. I will have you arrested right here in the lobby. You will be handcuffed in front of everyone, charged with corporate espionage, and you will spend the next 10 years rotting in a federal prison." Marcus let out a deep sigh of relief, regaining his arrogant posture. He genuinely believed his brother-in-law had just saved his sinking ship. "You really overplayed your hand this time, Sienna. You thought you could come in here and blackmail me with stolen data? You are nothing but a common criminal. Take the deal before Trent ruins your entire life." I looked at the four of them standing together. They formed a tight, unified front of absolute delusion. They were so blinded by their own elite status that they could not comprehend the reality of their situation. I did not panic. I did not reach for the settlement document. I simply smiled a slow, cold smile that caused Trent's thumb to hesitate over his phone screen. Elias Thorne watched the entire interaction with intense fascination. He leaned slightly on his silver-handled cane, his sharp eyes darting between Trent's aggressive posturing and my calm demeanor. The esteemed judge knew exactly what was happening. He recognized a desperate lawyer making a fatal miscalculation. "Are you done throwing tantrums, Trent?" I asked smoothly, adjusting the strap of my designer handbag on my shoulder. "Because if you are going to threaten me with federal prison, you should probably make sure you understand exactly how federal investigations actually work." Trent scoffed loudly, gripping his phone tighter. "I know the law perfectly well. You possess stolen corporate documents. That is a crime. End of story." "Call them," I challenged, stepping directly into Trent's personal space. "Dial the police. Better yet, call the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Call the exact same federal agents who granted my firm authorization." Trent froze. His thumb hovered over the glowing screen of his premium smartphone, his blue eyes darting wildly between my calm expression and the heavy binder resting on the glass table. The overwhelming silence in the courthouse lobby was deafening. He had expected me to cower in fear, to beg for his mercy, to grab the pathetic $10,000 settlement and run away crying. Instead, I had just invited him to summon federal authorities. "What is the matter, Trent?" I asked, my voice echoing clearly across the marble floor. "You were so eager to dial the authorities a moment ago. Press the button. Tell the police dispatcher that you have caught a dangerous corporate spy. Tell them you want to report a woman who stole highly classified financial data." Or are you suddenly trying to remember the basic legal definition of a federal subpoena? Marcus stepped forward, his face pale and contorted with deep confusion. Sienna, stop talking in riddles. What do you mean by federal agents? You do not know anyone at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You work in a tiny, cramped cubicle, doing basic payroll processing. You have completely lost your mind. I turned my gaze away from Trent and focused entirely on my soon-to-be ex-husband. I reached into the hidden inner pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled out a solid leather credential wallet, flipped it open with a sharp flick of my wrist, and tossed it right onto the center of the glass table, landing perfectly next to the massive binder. The heavy silver badge caught the harsh fluorescent light overhead. "Read the title, Marcus," I commanded sharply. "Read it out loud so your mother and your sister can finally understand exactly who they have been insulting for the past 3 years." Marcus leaned over cautiously. His eyes scanned the embossed gold lettering and the official federal seal. His jaw dropped open. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear his vision, his entire body going rigid with shock. "Certified Fraud Examiner," Marcus read aloud, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "Senior Director of Forensic Accounting, White Collar Crime Division." Eleanor let out a sharp gasp, clutching her designer handbag tightly against her chest. "Forensic accounting? That is impossible! You told us you were just a bookkeeper. You said you balanced ledgers for small local businesses." "I told you I worked in finance, Eleanor," I corrected coldly. "You simply assumed I was a low-level clerk because it fit your prejudiced narrative about my working-class background. You needed me to be beneath you. So I let you believe whatever made you feel superior. But while you were busy bragging to your high society friends about your son's imaginary real estate empire, I was sitting in a corner office in Manhattan, dismantling multi-million-dollar fraud syndicates for the federal government." Jada crossed her arms, defensively shrinking back slightly, though her voice lacked its earlier venom. "So what? You have a fancy title. That does not give you the right to hack into my brother's private servers. Trent is right. It is a massive conflict of interest for a wife to investigate her own husband. Any judge will throw that out." "It would be a conflict of interest if I initiated the investigation myself," I replied smoothly, pacing slowly around the coffee table. "But I did not initiate anything. Do you want to know how I got my hands on every single receipt, invoice, and hidden offshore transfer in your brother's portfolio? I was hired." "Hired by who?" Marcus demanded, his voice rising in sheer panic. "Who authorized you to look at my books?" "Your own investors, Marcus," I stated, watching the absolute horror wash over his face. "The prominent members of the Atlanta church community, the wealthy elders your mother courts at her elite charity galas. They poured millions of dollars into your commercial development projects. But 6 months ago, they noticed that the construction on the Midtown project had completely stalled. They noticed your quarterly returns were constantly delayed. They grew suspicious. So they quietly hired a top-tier New York forensic accounting firm to conduct a shadow audit. They specifically requested our agency because we have a reputation for absolute discretion." Eleanor swayed on her feet, realizing her pristine reputation within the elite circles was completely destroyed. The very people she tried to impress were the ones investigating her son. Trent finally found his voice, though it cracked pathetically. "That is illegal. They cannot authorize an audit without notifying the chief executive officer. You obtained those documents unlawfully." "Wrong again, Trent." I smiled, savoring his desperate ignorance. "The investors hold a 60% equity stake in the parent company, granting them full legal authority to compel an independent audit. When my agency discovered massive, glaring discrepancies in the preliminary ledgers, we took our findings straight to a federal judge. We secured a federal audit warrant. Those documents in that binder were legally seized under federal jurisdiction." Trent stumbled backward, hitting the marble pillar behind him. The reality of the situation crashed down on his arrogant shoulders. He had just threatened to call the police on a federal investigator. He had actively attempted to coerce a certified fraud examiner into signing an illegal non-disclosure agreement designed to cover up massive corporate embezzlement. He had walked blindly into an explosive legal landmine. His entire career was flashing before his eyes. Elias Thorne let out a low, booming laugh that commanded the entire lobby. The legendary judge clapped his hands together slowly, a sound of pure admiration and absolute authority. "A federal audit warrant," Elias repeated, turning his sharp eyes toward his trembling junior lawyer. "Well, Mr. Harrison, it appears you have just committed witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, and attempted extortion against an authorized federal auditor. You did this while explicitly representing Sterling and Vance. You have not just ruined your own career today. You have actively attempted to drag my entire law firm into a federal criminal conspiracy." "No, sir, please," Trent begged, his arrogant facade completely shattered. He held his hands up in total surrender, his knees visibly shaking. "I did not know. I swear to you, I thought she was just an angry wife trying to steal money. Marcus lied to me. He told me his books were perfectly clean." "My books are clean," Marcus shouted desperately, grabbing his hair. "Sienna, tell them, my business is legitimate. You are twisting numbers to make me look bad because we are getting a divorce." "Your business is a hollow shell, Marcus," I replied ruthlessly, pointing directly at the binder. "You have cooked your ledgers for 3 years. You fabricated invoices to cover up the fact that you were bleeding investor capital. And since you were stupid enough to challenge me in front of a former federal judge, we are not going to wait for a courtroom to discuss exactly where all that missing money went." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting frantically toward the towering columns. The arrogant posture he had maintained completely dissolved. He took a hesitant step toward me, holding his hands up in a pleading gesture. "Business is incredibly tough right now, Sienna," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking. "The supply chain broke down. Material costs skyrocketed overnight. I had to move some capital around temporarily to keep the project afloat. It was a standard corporate pivot. I was going to put every dollar back before the quarterly reports." I let out a harsh laugh. "A standard corporate pivot store? Do you actually hear yourself, Marcus? You are standing in front of a former federal judge and a certified fraud examiner, attempting to disguise grand larceny as a minor accounting error." I stepped back to the table and flipped the heavy binder open to a section marked with a red tab. The sound made Trent flinch visibly. "Let us look at these skyrocketing material costs," I said, running my finger down a column of bank transfers. "On the 14th of October, you authorized a wire transfer of $400,000 directly from the investor holding account. You labeled this transaction as a bulk purchase of industrial steel." I pulled a glossy photograph from the pocket of the binder and tossed it onto the glass table. It showed a breathtaking modern building overlooking the glittering Atlanta skyline. "That is not industrial steel, Marcus," I stated coldly. "That is the deed of sale for a luxury downtown penthouse, a property purchased entirely in cash. And the most fascinating part is the specific name listed on the primary deed." Eleanor pushed past Trent, her eyes wide with frantic curiosity. She stared down at the photograph. Her meticulously styled hair seemed to lose its bounce as the reality of the situation began to set in. "Marcus, what is she talking about?" Eleanor demanded, trembling with panic. "You told me the Midtown project was delayed because of permit issues with the city council. Why are you buying luxury penthouses downtown? Who is living in that property?" "Do not answer her, Marcus," Trent hissed, desperately, trying to salvage his legal standing. "Do not say another word without legal representation." "He does not need to speak," I interrupted, pulling a second document from the binder. "I will read it for him. The property is registered to a woman named Jessica Rollins. The name hit the air like a physical blow. Marcus visibly stopped breathing. He stumbled backward, his knees practically giving out, as he collided with the heavy wooden bench. Jada gasped loudly, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Jessica, your 24-year-old marketing assistant. Marcus, tell me you did not buy a penthouse for your assistant with company money. She is not just his assistant, Jada, I corrected sharply. She is his mistress. They have been having an affair for 8 months. While I was wiring personal savings to keep his fraudulent empire from collapsing, Marcus stole $400,000 of investor capital to buy a love nest for his girlfriend. Eleanor let out a shriek. Her knees buckled and she grabbed Trent's arm to remain standing. The sheer magnitude of the financial crime was horrifying, but Eleanor suddenly realized exactly whose money Marcus had stolen. The investors, Eleanor whispered, her eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated terror. Sienna, please tell me he did not use the primary investment fund. Please tell me he did not take that specific money. He took every last dime of it, Eleanor, I confirmed ruthlessly. He drained the primary equity account completely dry. Eleanor began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved as she grabbed the lapels of Marcus's suit, shaking him violently. You absolute fool! Do you have any idea what you have done? Do you know whose money that was? Marcus stared at the floor, unable to meet his mother's terrified gaze. I know whose money it was, I said, stepping closer to deliver the fatal blow to Eleanor's precious social standing. Your son did not just defraud Wall Street bankers. He stole directly from the pillars of the Atlanta church community. He took money from Deacon Thomas and Reverend Williams. He embezzled the retirement savings of women who sit on your elite charity boards. No! Eleanor cried out, tears ruining her expensive makeup. They will ruin us. The church elders will completely destroy our reputation. We will be permanently exiled from every social club in the city. Exiled. I laughed coldly. Eleanor, you are worried about losing your country club memberships. You should be worried about federal prison. Your son stole the church community's money to buy a luxury penthouse for his young mistress. When the congregation finds out their hard-earned investments funded his adultery, they will demand absolute vengeance. They will tear this family apart piece by piece. Marcus dropped his face into his hands, sobbing uncontrollably right there in the courthouse lobby. I can fix this, he cried pathetically. Sienna, please. I can sell the penthouse. I can get the money back. Just give me a chance to make this right. You cannot fix a shattered glass by pretending you did not drop it, Marcus, I replied, feeling absolutely no sympathy. The money is gone. The audit is finalized. The federal judge reviewed the findings. The entire community is about to see what kind of man you are. Eleanor turned to me, her pride completely broken. The haughty, arrogant matriarch, who had spent years treating me like dirt, was now sobbing hysterically. Sienna, I beg you, Eleanor pleaded, holding her hands together in prayer. You cannot do this to our family. We are respected people. We have a legacy to uphold. If the church finds out about the embezzled funds, we will lose absolutely everything. You have already lost everything, I stated firmly, closing the heavy binder with a definitive snap. You just refuse to open your eyes and look at the wreckage. Eleanor stared at the closed binder, her chest heaving as the absolute reality of her situation finally penetrated her carefully constructed world. The pristine image of her family was dead, but she was not ready to surrender the ghost of her social standing. I watched a terrifying transformation wash over my mother-in-law's face. The hysterical panic vanished, replaced by a mask of desperate, calculated maternal warmth. She smoothed the wrinkles from her Chanel blazer and stepped away from Trent. She walked toward me, extending her hands as if we were trusted allies, sharing a private burden. "Sienna, please listen to me," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We are both intelligent, proud Black women navigating a world that constantly wants to see us fail. You know how hard it is to build wealth and maintain respect in this city. My grandfather marched in the streets so we could have the right to own businesses in Atlanta. Marcus's father worked himself into an early grave to establish our family name in this community. We built a legacy of excellence from absolute nothing." She reached out, attempting to grasp my forearm, but I immediately took a firm step backward. Her hands fell empty to her sides, yet she continued her desperate performance. "If you hand those documents over to the authorities, you are not just punishing Marcus," Eleanor pleaded, her eyes widening with manufactured tears. "You are handing the establishment another excuse to tear down a successful Black enterprise. You are going to ruin our family legacy, and for what, Revenge? The media will have a field day. The blogs will drag our name through the mud. Do not let them see us tear each other apart in public. Keep this quiet, Sienna. We can handle this privately, within the family. We can sell the penthouse, reimburse the church investors quietly, and make you whole. I promise you we will give you whatever financial compensation you want." "You cannot buy silence with stolen money, Eleanor," I replied smoothly, "and do not dare weaponize our race or our community struggles to shield your son. The real betrayal is your son stealing the retirement funds of the hard-working Black elders you are claiming to protect." Eleanor's face tightened, her fake maternal warmth slipping away as her frustration mounted. Since appealing to my racial solidarity failed miserably, she quickly pivoted to her favorite weapon. She turned to the classic tactic of blaming the woman for the man's failures. "You left him with no other choice, Sienna." Eleanor hissed her tone, growing sharp and venomous. "Marcus made a terrible mistake, but you drove him right into the arms of that young assistant. A husband needs to feel respected and nurtured in his own home. He needs a wife who is present, not a woman who is constantly chained to a laptop, analyzing federal tax codes." Marcus suddenly looked up from his hands, finding a spark of courage in his mother's gaslighting. He nodded slowly, attempting to validate her claims. "I tried to be a good husband," Marcus muttered defensively. "But you were never there, Sienna. You were always flying to New York. You were always working late. You made me feel completely emasculated. Jessica actually listened to me. She made me feel like a successful man when you were constantly criticizing my business decisions." I looked at the two of them, appalled by their unified delusion. They were standing in a courthouse, facing federal embezzlement charges, and they still believed they could manipulate their way out of accountability by attacking my character. "Emasculated?" I asked, raising my voice so it echoed clearly off the marble columns. "You felt emasculated because I worked 60-hour weeks to ensure your fraudulent company did not default on its loans? You felt neglected because I was flying to New York to secure the exact same consulting contracts that paid the mortgage on your beautiful house in Buckhead. That is absolute garbage, Marcus, and you know it." I stepped aggressively toward my husband, pointing directly at his chest. "I was not criticizing your business decisions," I stated ruthlessly. "I was desperately trying to stop you from committing corporate suicide. You did not run to Jessica because she listened. You ran to a subordinate, because she was naive enough to believe your pathetic lies. You wanted an audience who would clap for your fake success instead of a partner who demanded actual accountability. You chose to embezzle $400,000. You chose to buy a penthouse for your mistress. You chose to lie to my face every single day for 8 months. I am not responsible for your lack of integrity." Eleanor stepped in front of Marcus again, her face flushed with anger. "It is a wife's duty to stand by her husband through his lowest moments. You took a vow before God, Sienna, for better or for worse. If you had just supported him emotionally, instead of throwing your money around to show off your independence, none of this would have happened. Do not quote wedding vows to me, Eleanor, I fired back, instantly shutting down her pathetic attempt at religious manipulation. Your son broke his vows the second he authorized a wire transfer of stolen church funds to finance his adultery. He did not hit a low moment. He actively orchestrated a massive federal crime. And as for my financial contributions, I was not showing off. I was being extorted by a man who threatened to ruin my credit score if I did not bail him out. I picked up the heavy binder from the glass table and tucked it under my arm. You both want to blame my career for this disaster, I asked, looking at the defeated mother and son. My career is the only reason you are not already wearing handcuffs. Since you hate my job so much, I am going to let my audit report speak for itself. I am done listening to your pathetic excuses. You can save your ridiculous gaslighting for the federal prosecutor right now, Eleanor. Eleanor finally retreated into a completely stunned, trembling silence. She finally realized her pristine social armor could not protect her against a federal indictment. I watched the matriarch crumble, but I was not finished. The true mastermind had been standing quietly by the marble pillar, hoping I would remain focused on my cheating husband. I locked my gaze entirely on the expensive suit of my arrogant brother-in-law. Trent subtly took 2 steps backward toward the exit. He calculated his escape route, adjusting his tie to reconstruct his shattered demeanor. Sienna Marcus's financial indiscretions have no bearing on your marriage dissolution, Trent stated loudly. Sterling and Vance cannot be held responsible for an individual CEO's actions. Embezzlement is a matter for his criminal attorney. I am stepping down as his representation immediately and withdrawing the settlement offer. He reached for his portfolio, eager to throw Marcus under the bus to save his own skin. I slammed my bare hand down flat, pinning his expensive portfolio to the table. You are not going anywhere, Trent, I said quietly. You do not get to pretend you were an innocent bystander. Do you really think Marcus, who can barely balance a checkbook, orchestrated a multi-million-dollar federal embezzlement scheme completely on his own? Marcus stared at his brother-in-law. Jada, who had remained quiet during the exposure of the mistress, suddenly stepped forward, her eyes darting frantically between her husband and me. What are you saying, Sienna? Jada demanded, her voice shaking with fresh terror. Trent is a respected corporate lawyer. He just handles the basic legal filings for Marcus Realty Group. He does not control the actual money. Oh, Jada, your husband does a lot more than file paperwork, I replied, pulling the black binder toward me. During my forensic audit, I did not just find the $400,000 Marcus stole for his girlfriend. That purchase was a reckless withdrawal made by a desperate man. But the rest of the missing investor capital? That money was moved with absolute precision. That money was scrubbed clean. I opened a section marked with a bright yellow divider. I pulled out a series of highly complex banking logs, spreading the spreadsheets across the glass table. Elias Thorne leaned forward on his silver-handled cane. The legendary judge peered through his reading glasses, his brilliant legal mind instantly recognizing the intricate pattern of the financial transactions. These are international wire routing numbers, Elias observed softly, his tone deadly serious. These are not standard corporate operating transfers. These represent layered institutional transactions designed specifically to evade domestic tax monitoring and bypass federal regulatory oversight. Exactly, Your Honor, I confirmed, turning my fierce gaze back to Trent. Marcus drained $800,000 from the church elder's primary investment fund. $400,000 went to the mistress. But the remaining $400,000 did not stay in Georgia. It was systematically siphoned out of the company over 6 months. Trent's face turned a horrifying shade of gray. A visible bead of sweat rolled down his temple. He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat was completely dry. Let us trace the money, I announced, tapping the top spreadsheet. On the first of every month, Marcus Realty Group authorized a wire transfer categorized as specialized legal consulting fees. These fees were paid to an external vendor completely bypassing standard accounts payable, but the money did not go to a domestic law firm. It did not go to Sterling and Vance. I slid the second spreadsheet forward, aligning it perfectly with the first. The funds were routed through 3 different domestic shell companies, each layer stripping away the original source of the capital, I explained methodically. Then the money crossed international borders. I tracked $250,000 of the missing investor funds, moving in a single massive wire transfer directly to a private offshore holding account located in the Cayman Islands. Eleanor gasped loudly, stumbling backward into the marble column behind her. The word offshore triggered an entirely new level of panic. This was no longer just a domestic scandal involving a foolish son. This was international money laundering. This was the kind of sophisticated financial crime that brought the unrelenting wrath of the federal government crashing down on entire families. "The Cayman Islands," Marcus whispered, looking completely bewildered. He stared at the spreadsheets, clearly seeing the offshore routing numbers for the very first time. "Trent, what is she talking about? I never authorized any transfers to the Cayman Islands. You told me those consulting fees were going into a secured domestic escrow account to protect our liquidity during the supply chain crisis. You said the money was safe." Jada grabbed her husband's arm, shaking him aggressively. "Trent, tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not move my brother's money to an offshore account. You promised me his business was fully compliant with the law." Trent aggressively yanked his arm out of his weeping wife's grasp. His chest heaved as he frantically tried to formulate a legal defense against airtight federal banking records. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his arrogant facade completely replaced by the frantic desperation of a trapped animal. "You cannot prove anything," Trent shouted, his voice echoing hysterically through the courthouse lobby. "Those are just random international routing numbers. You have no legal proof connecting me to any offshore shell company. You are guessing. You are throwing wild accusations at the wall and hoping something sticks to ruin my career. I am a senior corporate attorney. You are just a bitter ex-wife trying to cause a scene." I looked at Trent, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction, knowing I was about to drop the absolute heaviest hammer of my entire career right on top of his head. "I never guessed, Trent," I replied coldly, reaching into the very back of the binder to pull out the final, most devastating piece of evidence. I pulled a thick, blue-sealed folder from the very back of the binder and let it drop onto the glass table. The heavy thud made Trent jump. His eyes were wide with a frantic, animalistic panic. He knew exactly what a blue federal seal meant, but he was praying I did not possess the specific documents related to his personal accounts. He was wrong. "Let us talk about the Cayman Island Shell Company," I announced, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the courthouse lobby. "The entity receiving the stolen investor funds is registered under the name Apex Consulting Holdings. Marcus told his investors that Apex was an international logistics firm, helping to secure foreign construction materials. But that is a complete lie. Apex Consulting Holdings does not buy steel or concrete. It does not employ construction workers. It is a ghost company created solely to wash dirty money." Eleanor stared at the blue folder, her breathing shallow and ragged. She had spent her entire life worshiping wealth, but she had never been exposed to the brutal reality of federal financial crimes. Marcus kept his head down, staring at his expensive leather shoes. "When I traced the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands, I hit a massive firewall." I continued pacing slowly around the coffee table. "Offshore accounts are notoriously difficult to crack. The banks down there protect client identities with absolute secrecy. But whoever set up this specific shell company made a very arrogant, very stupid mistake. They assumed a domestic forensic audit would never secure the necessary international warrants to breach the corporate veil. They thought they were completely untouchable. Trent grabbed the edge of the glass table. His knuckles turned stark white. He was breathing heavily, his perfectly tailored suit suddenly looking like a prison uniform. "I secured the international warrants," I stated coldly, looking right into Trent's panicked blue eyes. "I breached the corporate veil. I obtained the original incorporation papers for Apex Consulting Holdings. And the registered owner of that offshore shell company is not my cheating husband. Marcus is too incompetent to set up a sophisticated international money laundering operation." I slid the blue folder across the glass table. It stopped mere inches from Trent's shaking hands. "The sole proprietor and registered agent of the Cayman Shell Company is you, Trent," I declared loudly. "You set up the offshore accounts, you drafted the fake consulting invoices, you actively helped Marcus launder $400,000 of stolen investor capital, and you did not do it out of the goodness of your heart or familial loyalty. You took a 20% cut of every single fraudulent transfer." Jada let out a blood-curdling scream. The sound echoed violently off the marble columns, startling everyone in the lobby. She lunged forward, grabbing her husband by the lapels of his expensive suit. "Trent!" Jada shrieked, shaking him with absolute fury. "Tell me she is lying! Tell me you did not help Marcus steal from the church elders! You promised me we were secure. We just bought a new house in Buckhead. If you go to federal prison, we will lose absolutely everything." Trent violently pushed his wife away. He stumbled backward, his face slick with cold sweat. His arrogant demeanor was completely shattered, replaced by the frantic desperation of a cornered criminal. He looked wildly around the lobby, searching for an escape route that did not exist. "She is lying!" Trent shouted hysterically, pointing a shaking finger at me. "This is a setup. Sienna fabricated these incorporation papers to destroy my career. I am a senior corporate attorney at Sterling & Vance. I have a flawless ethical record. I would never risk my entire livelihood for a pathetic 20% cut of a local real estate scam. Marcus must have stolen my identity to register the shell company. He set me up." Marcus snapped his head up, his eyes burning with sudden, intense hatred. The alliance between the cheating husband and the corrupt lawyer instantly evaporated. "Do not you dare blame this on me, Trent," Marcus yelled, stepping aggressively toward his brother-in-law. "You came to me with the offshore strategy. You told me it was the only way to hide the missing funds from the quarterly tax audits. You said the money would be completely untraceable. You charged me $80,000 in fake legal fees just to wash the cash." "Shut your mouth, Marcus!" Trent roared back, completely losing his composure. "You are a failed businessman who needed a bailout. You came crying to me because you were drowning in debt and spending company money on your little girlfriend. Do not drag me down with your sinking ship." I watched them tear each other apart with profound satisfaction. The perfect elite Atlanta family was imploding right in front of my eyes. Eleanor stood frozen in horror, watching her golden child and her prized son-in-law accuse each other of federal felonies in a public courthouse. "Nobody stole your identity, Trent," I interrupted, cutting through their vicious argument. "The incorporation documents require a certified, notarized signature and a thumbprint. Both match yours perfectly. Furthermore, I traced the $80,000 in laundered fees straight from the Cayman accounts back into your personal domestic investment portfolio. The money trail is absolute and undeniable." Trent simply gasped for air and quickly turned toward Elias Thorne, looking absolutely and completely terrified of his fast-approaching and inevitable downfall. Elias Thorne did not raise his voice, yet the sheer gravity of his posture demanded absolute silence in the cavernous courthouse lobby. The legendary judge stepped forward, his polished wooden cane tapping rhythmically against the marble floor. Each strike echoed like a gavel sealing a final judgment. He bypassed Marcus entirely, recognizing him as a foolish pawn, and stopped directly in front of the trembling corporate lawyer. "You have made a grave miscalculation, Mr. Harrison," Elias began, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that carried the weight of decades on the federal bench. You mistakenly believed that a law degree was a license to operate above the law. You assumed that because you could draft complex international contracts and navigate corporate loopholes, you were inherently smarter than the people you were sworn to protect. You looked at a brilliant certified federal investigator and saw only a vulnerable working-class woman you could intimidate. That sheer arrogance has just cost you your entire life. Trent shook his head frantically, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture. Your Honor, please listen to me. I have spent my entire career building the corporate division at Sterling & Vance. I have brought in millions in billable hours. You cannot let a domestic dispute ruin my partnership track. I can fix this. I can return the offshore money by the end of the business day. I will drain my personal investment portfolios to make them whole. Just keep this out of the federal courts. You still do not understand the severity of your actions, Elias replied, his tone devoid of any sympathy. This is no longer a matter of simply returning stolen capital. You have weaponized the pristine reputation of my law firm to facilitate a multi-million-dollar international money laundering scheme. You used Sterling & Vance escrow accounts to scrub embezzled retirement funds, stolen from the black community. You took a predatory 20% cut while helping your brother-in-law rob his own church elders. You have desecrated the very foundation of legal ethics. Jada let out a sharp sob, backing away from her husband as if he were carrying a contagious disease. Eleanor stood frozen in horror as she watched the most powerful man in the room dismantle her prized son-in-law piece by agonizing piece. Effective immediately, you are terminated from Sterling & Vance, Elias announced, his words striking Trent like physical blows. Your security clearance is permanently revoked. Your corporate email is disabled. If you attempt to access our servers or contact our clients, I will ensure you are charged with corporate espionage. Security is packing your office as we speak. Your personal belongings will be mailed to your home address, assuming the bank does not foreclose first. Trent's knees finally gave out. The arrogant, high-powered attorney collapsed onto the hard marble floor, landing heavily on his knees right in front of the man he had spent years trying to impress. He grabbed the hem of Elias's tailored suit jacket, his face stained with tears. "Please, sir, I am begging you," Trent sobbed, his voice cracking with pathetic desperation. "If you fire me for cause, my career is completely over. I have a mortgage. I have car payments. My entire life is built on my salary at the firm. I will resign quietly. I will sign a non-disclosure agreement. Just let me walk away with my license intact. Give me a second chance. I will testify against Marcus. I will give you everything to lock him up," Marcus shouted in protest, but Elias silenced him with a sharp glare. Elias looked down at the weeping lawyer with absolute disgust. He smoothly pulled his suit jacket out of Trent's desperate grasp and took a deliberate step backward. "A second chance," Elias scoffed, his voice booming with righteous anger. "Did you offer Sienna a second chance when you threw a fraudulent settlement on the table and threatened to bury her in litigation? Did you show mercy when you threatened to have her arrested by federal authorities for possessing documents she rightfully obtained? You were perfectly willing to destroy an innocent woman to protect your offshore bank accounts. You do not deserve mercy, Mr. Harrison. You deserve the full, unrelenting weight of the American justice system." Elias turned his attention briefly to me, nodding respectfully, before returning his fierce gaze to the pathetic man weeping on the floor. "I will not just terminate your employment," Elias promised, his voice cold and resolute. "I am going to personally draft the formal complaint to the American Bar Association. I will submit the offshore incorporation documents, the forged legal consulting invoices, and the domestic routing numbers directly to the Ethics Committee. I will ensure that you are disbarred in the state of Georgia And I will copy every federal regulatory agency on the filing to ensure you never practice law in any jurisdiction across this entire country ever again." Trent let out a devastating wail, curling into a tight ball on the courthouse floor. His entire identity, his wealth, his status, and his arrogant pride were completely annihilated. Furthermore, Elias continued striking his cane against the marble for emphasis, "I am personally walking these financial spreadsheets over to the district attorney's office. You and Marcus will both be facing federal indictments for wire fraud, embezzlement, and international money laundering. You thought you could wash stolen money in the Cayman Islands and walk away clean? Instead, you are going to spend the next 2 decades sitting in a federal penitentiary." The absolute finality of the judge's verdict hung heavily in the air. There was no appeal. There was no secret settlement. Trent was a dead man walking professionally and legally. He remained on his knees, sobbing into his hands, entirely broken. Jada stared at her husband in absolute revulsion, realizing she was married to a destitute, disbarred criminal who had just destroyed her perfect, high-society life in a matter of minutes. Jada let out a sound that was half sob, half furious scream. The pristine, perfectly manicured image of the elite Atlanta socialite evaporated in a fraction of a second. She lunged forward, her manicured nails digging violently into the shoulders of Trent's ruined designer suit. She shook him with a manic, unhinged strength that forced the towering lawyer to stumble backward against the cold marble floor. "You absolute idiot!" Jada shrieked, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings of the courthouse lobby, drawing the stares of every passing attorney and security guard. "You promised me we were untouchable. You told me that offshore money was a brilliant legal loophole that nobody would ever find. We just put a $2 million down payment on that estate in Buckhead. How am I supposed to show my face at the country club tomorrow? You have completely destroyed my life." Trent weakly tried to pry her fingers off his lapels, but all his imposing, arrogant strength had vanished. He was nothing but a hollow shell of a man facing decades in a federal penitentiary. "Jada, please, calm down," Trent begged, his voice cracking pitifully. "I was only trying to secure our financial future. Marcus begged me for help. He told me the real estate firm was going to default on the commercial loans. I was trying to save your family from total bankruptcy." "Save us!" Jada roared, slapping his hands away with absolute disgust. "You took a predatory 20% cut of stolen church funds. You used my brother's gross incompetence to line your own offshore pockets. You always thought you were so much smarter than us, Trent. You always looked down your nose at my family, acting like the great white savior of our business, but you are just a common thief in a custom suit. You are going to federal prison, and I am filing for divorce the second I walk out of this building." Trent covered his face, sobbing uncontrollably into his hands. He was completely broken, utterly discarded by the wife who only loved him for his prestige and earning potential. Having thoroughly discarded her husband, Jada whipped her head around to face her brother. Marcus took a terrified step backward, instinctively hiding behind Eleanor. But Jada was a woman watching her entire luxurious existence burn to the ground, and she wanted blood. She marched right up to Marcus, her eyes blazing with raw, unfiltered hatred. "And you!" Jada screamed, pointing a trembling finger directly in her brother's face. "You are the most pathetic excuse for a man I have ever known. You had a loyal wife who funded your miserable, failing company out of her own pocket. Sienna gave you everything. But your fragile ego could not handle the fact that a woman was the true financial backbone of your business. So you had to go play big shot CEO for some naive 24-year-old assistant." "Jada, keep your voice down," Eleanor hissed, frantically grabbing her daughter's arm. She was looking around the lobby in sheer panic, spotting several prominent Atlanta business owners watching this spectacular meltdown. "People are staring. You are ruining reputation." Our reputation is dead, Mother, Jada shouted, violently jerking her arm away from Eleanor. Did you not just hear what happened? Marcus stole from Deacon Thomas. He stole the retirement funds from the very women who sit on your charity board. Do you think anyone in the city is ever going to invite us to another gala? Do you think the church is going to let us walk through the front doors on Sunday? We are social pariahs. We are going to be on the front page of every local news blog by tomorrow morning. Marcus tried to defend himself, raising his hands in a weak, placating gesture. I was going to pay it back, Jada. The Midtown project just needed a little more time to become profitable. I was going to flip the penthouse and return the capital before the quarterly audit. It was a temporary loan. You bought a luxury penthouse for a homewrecker while your own company was drowning in debt, Jada screamed, her voice cracking with fury. You dragged my husband into a federal money laundering scheme to hide your pathetic infidelity. You threw our entire family legacy into the gutter because you could not keep your hands to yourself. The perfect elite facade of the Harrison and Marcus families violently imploded, right there in the middle of the courthouse hallway. There was no more Southern charm. There was no more high society grace. They were screaming, cursing, and tearing each other apart like starving wolves, fighting over a scrap of meat. Eleanor was weeping hysterically, begging her children to stop shouting. Marcus was yelling back at Jada, blaming Trent for orchestrating the offshore accounts. Trent remained curled on the marble floor, sobbing over his annihilated legal career. I stood a few feet away, standing shoulder to shoulder with Elias Thorne. I watched the absolute destruction of my abusers with a cold, detached silence. I did not feel an ounce of pity. For 3 years they had gaslighted me, insulted my working-class background, and treated my financial contributions like they were nothing. They had demanded respect they never earned, and projected a wealth they did not actually possess. They had tried to force me out of my own marriage, with a completely insulting $10,000 check and a threat to ruin my life. Now their own greed had completely consumed them. They had built an empire of sand, glued together by lies, ego, and stolen money. The moment a gentle breeze of truth blew through the room, the entire structure collapsed. They were turning on each other exactly as their selfish, predatory natures dictated. There was absolutely zero loyalty among thieves. Fascinating, Elias murmured quietly beside me, leaning heavily on his wooden cane. You can always measure true character by despot people today. The sound of Elias Thorne's voice grounded me as the chaotic echoes of the Harrison and Marcus families continued to bounce off the marble walls of the courthouse lobby. I watched Marcus. The arrogant CEO facade he had worn just 20 minutes ago was entirely gone. He looked at Trent, who was still sobbing on the floor, and then at his mother, Eleanor, who was clutching her chest in a state of absolute shock. The reality of a federal indictment was a heavy, suffocating blanket, and Marcus was finally suffocating beneath it. His eyes darted wildly, searching for a lifeline in a room full of people who were actively drowning. Slowly, his gaze locked onto me. I stood perfectly still, my posture straight and unyielding. I held the black binder containing the forensic audit against my chest, like a shield. Marcus took a trembling step forward. His expensive leather shoes scuffed awkwardly against the polished floor. Then the man who had spent the last 3 years belittling my career, dismissing my financial contributions, and flaunting his unearned elite status, did the unthinkable. Marcus collapsed onto his knees right in front of me. The sound of his knees hitting the marble drew a sharp gasp from his sister Jada. But Marcus ignored her. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and brimming with frantic tears. He reached out with trembling hands, desperately trying to grab the hem of my tailored skirt. But I took a sharp step backward. "Sienna, please," Marcus begged, his voice cracking with a pathetic, high-pitched desperation. "Please, you have to listen to me. You have to understand that I never wanted any of this to happen." I was completely in over my head. The supply chain issues were destroying the company, and I was terrified of losing everything we built. I was terrified of failing you. Trent manipulated me. He told me the offshore accounts were standard practice for developers. He swore it was a legal tax mitigation strategy. I did not know he was laundering the money. I did not know he was taking a 20% cut. He preyed on my desperation, Sienna. He used me. I looked down at my husband, feeling a profound sense of revulsion. He was a coward to his very core. "You are blaming Trent for the money laundering?" I asked, my voice dripping with cold mockery. "Fine. Trent is a corrupt lawyer, but did Trent also force you to embezzle $400,000 from the church elders? Did Trent force you to unbutton your shirt and crawl into bed with a 24-year-old marketing assistant? Was that also a standard tax mitigation strategy, Marcus?" Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, fresh tears rolling down his cheeks. He shook his head violently, eager to throw his mistress under the bus just as quickly as he had thrown his brother-in-law. "Jessica means absolutely nothing to me," Marcus cried out, his voice echoing with shameful desperation. "She threw herself at me, Sienna. She knew I was stressed about the commercial loans. She knew I was vulnerable. She fed my ego when I was feeling crushed by the debt. She manipulated my stress to get that penthouse. It was a massive, stupid mistake. You are my wife. You are the woman I took vows with before God. I love you, Sienna. I have always loved you. Please, you have to give me a second chance. I will end it with Jessica right now. I will call her and fire her. I will block her number. I will sell the downtown penthouse today and put every single dollar back into the primary investor fund. I can make this right. Just give me the opportunity to prove I can be the husband you deserve." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. The absolute audacity of his plea was almost comical. "You want to prove you can be a good husband now?" I asked, looking down at his tear-stained face. "You want to honor our wedding vows now that you are staring down the barrel of a 20-year federal prison sentence? Your love is completely conditional on your survival, Marcus. You did not love me an hour ago when you were standing with Trent trying to force me to sign a $10,000 settlement while hiding millions in stolen capital. You did not love me when you were spending my hard-earned savings to keep your fraudulent empire afloat. You only love me right now because I am holding the federal audit that will send you to a concrete cell." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket with shaking hands. "I will give you the company," he pleaded frantically. "I will sign over 100% of the equity in Marcus Realty Group to you right now. I will step down as CEO. You can have total control of the entire portfolio. You can have the Buckhead estate. You can have the cars. You can have absolutely everything, Sienna. Just hand me that black binder. Let me destroy the offshore routing numbers. Let me shred the fake consulting invoices. Do not hand this over to the district attorney. Do not let Elias Thorne call the federal authorities. Please, Sienna. I am begging you on my knees to save my life." I stared at him with absolute ice in my veins. "You are offering me the equity in a company that is drowning in fraudulent debt," I mocked, my voice sharp and unyielding. "You are offering me a real estate empire built entirely on stolen church funds and laundered money. I do not want your garbage company, Marcus. I do not want your tainted assets. And I am certainly not going to obstruct a federal investigation to save a man who treated me like an insignificant cashier." Before I could utter another word, the heavy elevator doors slid open. The polished steel doors of the courthouse elevator slid open with a soft chime. Stepping out into the grand marble lobby was a young woman who looked entirely out of place amidst the devastation unfolding around us. She wore a bright red designer dress, oversized sunglasses pushed up into her meticulously styled blonde hair, and carried a shopping bag from an expensive luxury boutique. This was Jessica. The 24-year-old marketing assistant who thought she had successfully stolen a multi-million-dollar CEO from his boring working-class wife. Marcus had texted her an hour ago, bragging that he was about to secure an easy divorce settlement. Jessica pulled her sunglasses down, a triumphant smile plastered across her face. Then her eyes adjusted to the scene. She saw Trent, the supposedly untouchable corporate lawyer, curled into a pathetic ball on the floor, weeping into his ruined suit. And finally, she saw Marcus. Her wealthy, powerful boyfriend was kneeling on the floor, staring up at me, with tears streaming down his face, begging for mercy. "Marcus?" Jessica asked, her voice high-pitched and trembling with uncertainty. "What is going on here? You texted me that the divorce was finished and that your ex-wife took the $10,000 check. You said we were going to celebrate at the country club." Marcus squeezed his eyes shut and buried his face in his hands. He did not even look at her. I stepped forward, closing the distance between myself and the woman who had helped destroy my marriage. I looked her up and down, taking in her expensive dress and the fresh shopping bag. "He is on the floor because he is trying to negotiate his way out of a 20-year federal prison sentence," I said smoothly, extending my hand toward her. "You must be Jessica. I am Sienna. I am the ex-wife who supposedly took the $10,000 check." Jessica took a defensive step backward, clutching her shopping bag tightly against her chest. She looked at Marcus, silently, begging him to stand up and defend her. But Marcus remained frozen on his knees. "I do not know what you are talking about," Jessica stammered, trying to muster a shred of her previous arrogance. "Marcus is a highly successful CEO. You are just trying to cause drama because you are jealous that he upgraded." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. "Upgraded, oh Jessica. You really have no idea who you are dating, do you, Marcus? Did not upgrade. He downgraded his entire life the moment he decided to embezzle money to impress you." I reached into my black binder, flipping past the offshore routing numbers and the fake consulting invoices. I walked over and held it out to her. Jessica hesitated, her eyes darting nervously toward Elias Thorne, who was watching the exchange with quiet fascination. Slowly, she reached out and took the paper from my hand. "Read it," I instructed her calmly. "Since you are his partner now, you should probably understand the true state of his real estate empire." Her eyes scanned the official letterhead and her jaw dropped. The color completely drained from her face. She looked up at Marcus, her eyes wide with shock and sudden, terrifying realization. "This is a foreclosure notice," Jessica whispered, her voice shaking violently. "This is a foreclosure notice for the downtown penthouse. Marcus, what is this? You told me you bought this property from me in cash." "He lied to you, Jessica," I explained, not giving Marcus a chance to formulate another pathetic excuse. "Marcus never bought that penthouse. He leased it, under a fraudulent corporate entity using stolen investor capital. And because his company has been completely bankrupt for the past 6 months, he has not paid the rent on that luxury unit since the day you moved in. The bank officially initiated foreclosure proceedings 3 days ago. You have exactly 48 hours to pack your designer clothes and vacate the premises before the county sheriff arrives to physically lock you out." "No," Jessica gasped, shaking her head in denial. "He showed me the accounts." "He showed you forged documents," I stated ruthlessly. "Just like the forged documents he used to steal money from his own church community. Your entire relationship was funded by a massive criminal enterprise, and the money has officially run out. There is no penthouse. There is no wealthy CEO waiting to marry you. There is only a broke, desperate criminal kneeling on a courthouse floor, waiting for the federal authorities to come and put him in handcuffs." Jessica stared at me, then looked back at the document in her trembling hands. The reality of her situation crashed down upon her with brutal force. She had traded her youth and her dignity for a man who was completely and utterly worthless. She had believed she was securing a life of effortless luxury, but she had actually chained herself to a sinking ship. She looked at Marcus, who finally raised his head to meet her gaze. He offered no defense, no reassurances, and no promises of a better future. He just looked like a terrified little boy who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar.
You lied to me!
Jessica screamed, her voice cracking with absolute fury. She crumpled the foreclosure notice in her fist and threw it directly at his face. You told me you were a millionaire. You told me you were going to take care of me. You are nothing but a broke, pathetic liar. Marcus flinched as the crumpled paper hit his cheek, but he remained silent. Jessica let out a frustrated sob, turned on her high heels, and sprinted back toward the elevator bank. She slammed her hand against the call button, desperate to escape the devastating reality of the courthouse lobby. The doors opened, and she threw herself inside, abandoning Marcus without a second thought. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing his absolute isolation. He had betrayed his wife for a mistress who abandoned him the exact moment his stolen money vanished. He was left with nothing, surrounded by the ruins of his own making. The sharp chime of the descending elevator echoed through the cavernous marble lobby, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. Marcus remained frozen on his knees, his eyes wide and vacant as he stared at the polished steel doors that had just swallowed his future. The mistress he had sacrificed his entire marriage for had not even looked back. She had dropped him the exact second she realized he was no longer a human ATM. The illusion of his irresistible charm and dominant corporate power was completely shattered. He was not a beloved CEO or desired partner. He was just a mark, an easy target for a 24-year-old assistant who saw a weak, insecure man desperately waving stolen cash to buy her affection. I looked down at the pathetic figure of my soon-to-be ex-husband. His custom navy suit, which had looked so intimidating an hour ago, now hung on his slumped shoulders like a crumpled garbage bag. He reached a trembling hand up to touch his cheek, where the crumpled foreclosure notice had struck him. She did not even hesitate, Marcus, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet lobby like a sharpened blade. Did you really think a woman who was perfectly fine with helping you destroy your marriage actually possessed any genuine loyalty? Did you honestly believe she loved you for your brilliant mind and your sparkling personality? You bought her loyalty with stolen church funds, and the moment the money ran out, so did her love. You are absolutely nothing without my financial backing. And now you do not even have the illusion of her affection to keep you warm at night. Marcus slowly lowered his hand. His chest heaved as he struggled to draw air into his panic-constricted lungs. He looked around the lobby, his eyes darting wildly between his weeping mother, his furious sister, and his completely broken brother-in-law. He had no allies left. Every bridge was burned to ashes. I still have the commercial properties, Marcus stammered, his voice sounding hollow and detached from reality. He was frantically grasping at invisible straws, trying to reconstruct his destroyed empire using pure delusion. The downtown office building and the retail park on the west side, those are under my sole proprietorship. They are protected from the federal audit. I can liquidate those assets. I can hire a criminal defense attorney. I can post bail. I am not completely broke. I let out a harsh, merciless laugh. His ignorance of his own business was truly staggering. He had spent so much time playing golf and entertaining his mistress that he had completely lost track of his own corporate ledger. You really are a terrible businessman, Marcus, I stated, shaking my head with profound pity. You think you own the downtown office building and the retail park? Let me educate you on the concept of cross-collateralization. When you took out those massive loans to cover your failing real estate projects, you signed personal guarantees. When you could not make the payments, the bank did not just look at your failing company. They looked at every single asset attached to your name. I opened my black binder one more time and pulled out a stack of stamped bank notices. I let them flutter down onto the glass table, landing right next to the fraudulent divorce settlement Trent had tried to force on me. "I did not just audit your company accounts, Marcus," I explained ruthlessly. "I audited your personal wealth. You have absolutely zero equity in any of those commercial properties. You leveraged them to the maximum limit to secure the loans you eventually defaulted on. The bank seized the commercial properties 3 weeks ago. You do not own a single brick of that downtown office building. You do not own a single parking spot at the retail park. You are completely, unequivocally bankrupt." Marcus let out a strangled gasp, his hands flying to his head as if trying to physically hold his skull together. "But what about my private accounts?" he whispered frantically, looking up at me with sheer terror. "I had a secret domestic safety net. I put away $50,000 in a private checking account that Trent did not know about. I kept it separate from the corporate ledgers." Trent, who was still curled on the floor, snapped his head up at this revelation. Even in his utter destruction, the corrupt lawyer was furious to learn that Marcus had tried to double-cross him. "You hid money from me?" Trent yelled, his voice cracking with rage. "I risked my entire federal law license to wash your stolen funds, and you were skimming off the top to hide cash from me?" "There is no honor among thieves," I mocked, watching the two criminals turn their hatred toward each other yet again. I focused my gaze back on Marcus. "And regarding your secret domestic safety net, you made the fatal mistake of attaching your personal Social Security number to that account. When the federal investigators authorized my audit, they froze every single financial vehicle associated with your identity. That $50,000 is currently sitting in a federal holding account, waiting to be redistributed to the church elders you stole from." Marcus stared at me with unblinking, horrified eyes. The full weight of his destitution finally crushed him. He had no secret accounts. He had no commercial properties. He had no luxury penthouse. He had no mistress. He had no legal representation. He did not even have the $10,000 he had arrogantly tried to offer me as a divorce settlement. He was a man, standing in a custom suit, who could not even afford to buy a cup of coffee from the courthouse vending machine. "You are walking out of this building with the clothes on your back and absolutely nothing else," I declared, delivering the final crushing blow. "You thought you could discard me like trash. You thought you could replace me with a younger, prettier model and ride off into the sunset with my hard-earned money? But I am the one who built you, Marcus. I am the one who kept the lights on, and I am the one who just turned them off. You are entirely finished." Marcus let out a devastating, pathetic sob. He crumpled forward, pressing his forehead against the cold marble floor, weeping uncontrollably. He was reduced to a miserable, groveling mess, stripped of every single thing that gave him power. The elite Atlanta CEO was completely dead, replaced by a destitute criminal waiting for the authorities to arrive. It was finally completely and utterly over for him. The sound of Marcus weeping against the cold marble floor was a pathetic symphony of defeat. He was completely broken, a hollow shell of the arrogant man who had tried to discard me just an hour earlier. I looked down at him without a single ounce of pity. But the destruction of the Golden Child was not the end of this battle. From the periphery of the chaotic lobby, a new kind of desperation began to stir. Eleanor watched her precious son groveling at my feet, and I saw something snap behind her perfectly manicured facade. For her entire life, Eleanor had carefully curated an image of absolute perfection. She had hosted the charity galas, dominated the church committees, and looked down her nose at anyone who did not possess generational wealth. Now, she was watching her legacy burn to ash in a public courthouse. Instead of comforting her sobbing son, Eleanor stepped right over him. She straightened her posture, smoothed the wrinkles from her expensive tweed blazer, and adjusted her pearl necklace. She was summoning every ounce of matriarchal authority she had left. She marched toward me, positioning herself between me and the legendary judge Elias Thorne. "That is quite enough of this theatrical display, Sienna," Eleanor demanded, her voice attempting to regain its booming, authoritative resonance. "You have made your point. You have humiliated my son. You have dragged the prestigious name of our family through the absolute mud. But this stops right here, right now. I will not allow a bitter, vindictive woman to destroy a legacy that took 3 generations to build." I simply raised an eyebrow, tightening my grip on the black binder. "You think I am destroying your legacy, Eleanor? Your son embezzled money from your own church. They destroyed themselves with their own greed. I just brought the receipts." "You do not understand the first thing about legacy," Eleanor hissed, taking another step closer. "You come from a neighborhood where people rent apartments and live paycheck to paycheck. You have no concept of what it means to carry the weight of an elite family name in this city. The Marcus family represents excellence. We represent the pinnacle of success for our community. If you hand that audit over to the federal authorities, you are not just hurting Marcus. You are embarrassing all of us in front of the entire world. I will simply not allow you to do that." "You do not have the power to allow or disallow anything," I replied smoothly, meeting her furious gaze with absolute calm. "You are completely out of options." Eleanor took a deep breath, her eyes darting around the lobby before locking back onto mine. She realized that intimidation was no longer working. She needed to bargain. She needed to offer me the one thing she believed a working-class woman could never resist. "I know what you really want, Sienna," Eleanor said, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial, almost patronizing whisper. "I know why you married into this family. You always craved the status that we possess. You wanted to belong to the upper echelon of Atlanta society. You wanted the prestige that comes with our name." I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head at her profound delusion, but I let her continue speaking. "I am willing to offer you the ultimate prize," Eleanor declared, lifting her chin with overwhelming arrogance. "I am talking about the ancestral estate in Buckhead. It is the crown jewel of our entire family, a 10,000 square foot mansion sitting on 4 acres of prime manicured real estate. It has the grand marble columns, the sweeping staircases, the history. It is a home that commands instant respect from anyone who drives past its iron gates. It is something you could never, ever acquire on your own with a simple accounting salary." Eleanor extended her hands, her eyes burning with a desperate, manic intensity. "I own that estate free and clear. It is entirely in my name. If you hand over that black binder right now, if you delete every single digital file on your hard drives, and if you sign a permanent non-disclosure agreement, I will give you the deed to the Buckhead mansion today. I will sign the property over to you by the end of the hour. You will become one of the wealthiest homeowners in the most exclusive neighborhood in the state." She thought she was offering me a golden ticket to the life she assumed I desperately coveted. She believed that the sheer monetary value and social prestige of the ancestral mansion would make me forget about the infidelity, the emotional abuse, and the massive federal crimes her son had committed. "You are offering me your own home to cover up federal felonies?" I asked, making sure my voice carried clearly so Elias could hear every single word of her attempted bribery. "I am offering you a way to walk out of this courthouse as a tremendously wealthy woman." Eleanor corrected her tone, laced with desperate urgency. "You can take the mansion, you can sell it, or you can live in it like the queen you always pretended to be. Marcus will walk away with his freedom. Trent will keep his law license. The church will never know about the missing funds because we will quietly replace them over time. We can all walk away from this disaster and keep our reputations perfectly intact. All you have to do is hand me the audit, Sienna. Give me the book, and the crown jewel of Atlanta is yours." I stood perfectly still, looking at the delusional matriarch, trying to bribe a federal investigator in broad daylight. She was willing to give up her most prized possession to protect a son who had already thrown their entire lives into a roaring fire. I looked down at the binder, then back at Eleanor's desperate face. She truly had absolutely no clue what was coming next. I stared at the matriarch, letting the absurdity of her desperate proposition hang in the heavy air of the grand courthouse lobby. Eleanor genuinely believed her ancestral Buckhead mansion was the ultimate trump card. She thought a poor working-class woman from the south side of Atlanta would immediately surrender all professional morals for wrought iron gates and a grand marble staircase. Her very fragile worldview was constructed on the premise that generational wealth could buy permanent silence, unwavering compliance, and blind obedience. She looked at me with an expectant, eager smile, waiting for me to hand over the black binder and accept her generous bribe. "You really think you are holding a royal flush, do you not, Eleanor?" I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You think you can just wave a deed in my face and I will magically forget the rampant infidelity, financial abuse, and the federal crimes your son committed? You think the prestige of your precious family name is enough to buy my integrity? I am offering you a highly pragmatic solution to a very messy public problem," Eleanor replied quickly, her sharp tone hardening as she sensed my resistance. "Do not be completely foolish, Sienna. You are a forensic accountant. You deal in assets and liabilities. I am offering you an asset that will appreciate for the rest of your life. Just take the mansion. Let my son go free today. It is a very simple business transaction." "You are right about one thing," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. "I do deal in assets and liabilities, and a part of my job is verifying the legal ownership of physical assets involved in any transaction. When I conducted the audit of your son's crumbling real estate firm, I had to trace every single dollar he spent over the past 3 years. I had to find out exactly how he funded his luxury cars, his mistress's penthouse, and his massive gambling debts." Eleanor frowned, glancing down at Marcus, who was still weeping softly on the floor. "Gambling debts? Marcus does not gamble. He is a respected businessman. Your highly respected businessman dropped over $2 million at illegal poker tables in Las Vegas and underground casinos right here in Atlanta," I corrected her. "When the commercial loans dried up, and Trent could not launder the stolen church funds fast enough, Marcus needed a massive influx of cash to keep creditors from breaking his legs. He needed collateral. He needed a pristine, unencumbered asset with massive equity." I watched the color begin to drain from Eleanor's face. The confident, arrogant matriarch was slowly starting to understand the terrifying trajectory of my harsh words. She took a tiny, involuntary step backward, clutching her pearl necklace with trembling fingers. "No, that is impossible," Eleanor whispered, her trembling voice barely audible over the ambient background noise of the lobby. "The Grand Buckhead estate is entirely in my name. My late husband left it exclusively to me. Marcus has absolutely no legal right whatsoever to touch that property." "He did not need a legal right," I stated, my voice sharp and cutting. "He just needed a gullible mother who trusted him blindly. Do you remember 8 months ago when Marcus brought you a stack of complex corporate tax forms to sign? He told you it was routine paperwork to help shield the family trust from capital gains taxes. He told you to just sign on the dotted line so his legal team could handle the rest. You did not even bother to read the documents, did you, Eleanor? You just signed them because the golden child asked you to." Eleanor gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Her eyes widened with absolute horror as the memory of that day clearly flashed through her mind. "He slipped a binding commercial mortgage agreement directly into that massive stack of papers," I revealed, delivering the fatal blow with absolute ice in my veins. Marcus secretly mortgaged the ancestral Buckhead mansion just to secure a $4 million high-interest loan from a private equity firm. He leveraged your entire family legacy to cover his failing investments and pay off his bookies. And because his company has been completely insolvent, he has not made a single payment on that mortgage in the last 8 months. I opened my black binder one final time. I bypassed the offshore routing numbers and the corporate embezzlement files. I pulled out a heavy, watermarked document printed on official bank letterhead. I held it out to the violently trembling, devastated woman standing frozen in front of me. "You cannot bribe me with a house you no longer own, Eleanor," I said, my voice echoing with finality. "This is the official notice of foreclosure. The bank petitioned the courts 3 weeks ago when the grace period expired. The judge signed the final order yesterday afternoon. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the Buckhead estate was formally repossessed. The locks have already been changed. The security codes have been wiped. You do not own a mansion anymore. You are entirely, unequivocally homeless." Eleanor took the document with shaking hands. Her eyes scanned the bold black letters, the bank seals, and the judge's signature. She read the address of her beloved ancestral home, followed by the terrifying words declaring immediate seizure of property. The paper slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor to land right next to her sobbing son. The proud, elite Atlanta socialite let out a sound that I would never forget. It was a guttural gasp of pure, unfiltered despair. Her knees buckled beneath her. The Chanel suit crumpled as she collapsed onto the courthouse bench behind her, unable to support her own weight. She stared blankly ahead, her reality utterly shattered. She had lost her wealth, her status, her pristine reputation, and the roof over her head. The Marcus family empire had been completely eradicated, burned to the ground by the very arrogance and greed they had worshipped for decades. The silence that followed the dropping of that foreclosure notice was profound. But it did not last long. A blood-curdling scream ripped from the back of Eleanor's throat. It was a visceral, horrifying sound that tore through the polished marble corridors of the courthouse. The noise was so piercing that several lawyers stopped dead in their tracks, turning to witness the absolute destruction of one of the most prominent matriarchs in Atlanta. Eleanor sat crumpled on the wooden bench, her impeccable posture entirely destroyed. Her hands clutched frantically at her chest as she gasped for air. She looked down at the foreclosure document resting on the floor beside her son, her eyes wide with a frantic, unhinged terror. In a matter of seconds, her entire identity had been stripped away. She was no longer the elite socialite who hosted charity galas and dictated the social hierarchy of her church. She was the mother of a federal criminal. She was a woman who had allowed her own arrogance to blind her to the financial rot decaying her family tree. And worst of all, she was entirely homeless. The realization that she would have to face her wealthy friends, her fellow board members, and her country club peers as a destitute woman was worse than death to her. She buried her face in her hands and began to weep, with loud, ugly, uncontrollable sobs. A few feet away, the situation was equally catastrophic. Jada was pacing in tight, frantic circles, her high heels clicking sharply against the stone floor. She looked at Trent, her husband, who was still curled in a pathetic ball near the glass coffee table. The reality of his impending federal prison sentence was finally sinking into her mind. Jada realized that her own life of luxury was completely over. The offshore money that funded her expensive vacations, her designer wardrobe, and her brand new estate deposit was going to be seized by the federal government. She stopped pacing and let out a wail of pure agony. She kicked her husband in the leg, screaming at him to get up, demanding that he fix this disaster. But Trent did not move. He just lay there, whimpering about his disbarment and his ruined reputation. Jada dropped to her knees beside him, sobbing hysterically, as she realized she was bound to a convicted money launderer. Her perfect marriage was a criminal conspiracy, and she was now the laughingstock of the entire city. Then there was Marcus, the golden child, the brilliant real estate chief executive officer who had orchestrated this entire collapse. Marcus remained completely catatonic on the floor. He had not moved a single muscle since I revealed the freezing of his secret domestic accounts. His hands rested limply by his sides, his head bowed so low that his forehead nearly touched the marble tiles. He was staring blankly into the absolute void. The human brain can only process a certain amount of devastating trauma before it simply shuts down to protect itself, and Marcus had reached his absolute limit. He had lost his multi-million-dollar company. He had lost his commercial properties. He had lost the luxury downtown penthouse. He had lost his 24-year-old mistress. He had lost his secret cash reserves. He had lost his ancestral family mansion. And he had lost the one woman who had actually loved him enough to fund his dreams. He was staring down the barrel of a lengthy federal indictment with zero financial resources to mount a legal defense. He was paralyzed by the magnitude of his own catastrophic failures. I stood tall, watching the family that had spent years treating me like absolute trash, completely drown in the consequences of their own actions. For 3 years, they had mocked my working-class background. They had called me a glorified cashier. They had insulted my intelligence and demanded that I bow down to their unearned supremacy. They had genuinely believed that their wealth and their status made them completely invincible. But they had fundamentally misunderstood the power of accountability. They had built an empire of cards assuming the wind would never blow. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt as I watched them suffer. I did not feel any lingering affection for the man kneeling on the floor. I felt nothing but a profound, liberating sense of justice. The universe has a remarkable way of balancing the scales when arrogant people refuse to check their own greed. The gathering crowd in the courthouse lobby watched the spectacle with quiet fascination. Elite defense attorneys, security guards, and administrative clerks stood in a wide circle, witnessing the total annihilation of the Harrison and Marcus families. Nobody stepped forward to offer them comfort. Nobody tried to help Trent off the floor. Nobody offered Eleanor a tissue. They were completely isolated in their misery. The elite society they had worshipped and desperately tried to impress was now looking down at them with sheer pity and absolute disgust. I looked over at Elias Thorne. The legendary former federal judge was leaning comfortably on his silver-handled wooden cane, observing the destruction with a calm, analytical gaze. He nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement of the flawless, methodical execution of my forensic audit. I had not needed to raise my voice. I had not needed to throw a physical punch. I had simply laid out the absolute truth backed by undeniable financial data and let their own corruption tear them apart from the inside out. I reached down and picked up the black binder from the glass table. I secured the foreclosure notice, the offshore routing numbers, and the forged consulting invoices safely inside. The trap had been perfectly set, the bait had been taken, and the steel jaws had snapped shut with devastating precision. There was absolutely nothing left for me to do here. The total collapse of their empire was entirely, unequivocally complete, leaving them ruined. I turned and walked away. As my heels clicked against the pristine marble floor, carrying me toward the grand exit of the courthouse lobby, a silver-handled wooden cane gently tapped the ground directly in my path. I paused, looking up to meet the warm, deeply analytical gaze of Elias Thorne. The legendary former federal judge had not moved from his spot near the central pillars. He had watched the entire demolition of the Marcus family empire in absolute silence, and now, a small, profoundly impressed smile played across his weathered face. He adjusted his charcoal suit jacket and looked at me with an expression of pure professional admiration. "I have presided over federal courtrooms for more than 3 decades," Elias said, his deep voice resonating with quiet authority. "I have watched the most expensive, highly educated corporate litigators in the country attempt to dismantle fraudulent empires. I have seen men tear each other apart over millions of dollars. But I must admit, Sienna, I have never seen a takedown quite as methodical, ruthless, and perfectly executed as the one I just witnessed today. You did not raise your voice in hysterical anger. You did not throw a physical punch. You simply weaponized the absolute truth and allowed their own arrogant greed to serve as their executioner. It was nothing short of brilliant." I offered him a small, genuine smile, feeling the heavy burden of the past 3 years finally lifting from my shoulders. "Thank you, Elias. When you spend your entire life being underestimated by people who think their wealth gives them immunity to consequences, you learn to let the numbers do the talking. Numbers do not have egos. Numbers do not lie. I just followed the paper trail." Elias nodded slowly, his eyes gleaming with a sharp, calculating intensity. "Indeed, they do not. And it takes a very specific, rare kind of intellect to trace those numbers through the muddy waters of offshore accounts and shell companies without losing your nerve. You possess a remarkable talent, Sienna. You possess a level of surgical precision that cannot be taught in a standard accounting classroom. It requires instinct, courage, and an unwavering moral compass." He leaned forward slightly, resting both hands on the silver handle of his cane. "When we first spoke on the airplane, I mentioned that I was the founding partner of Sterling and Vance, but that is merely one facet of my professional portfolio. I also serve as the chairman of a highly specialized private equity and crisis management firm headquartered in Manhattan. We deal with massive corporate restructuring, federal compliance audits, and high-stakes financial investigations for global entities. We are currently dealing with a severe shortage of truly exceptional forensic talent." I looked at him, my heart beating a steady, confident rhythm. I knew exactly where this conversation was heading, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely prepared to seize the opportunity. "I recently lost my lead financial investigator to an early retirement," Elias continued, his tone shifting into a serious, business-like cadence. "I need someone who can walk into a hostile corporate boardroom, identify the financial rot, and surgically extract the truth without flinching. I need someone who is not intimidated by powerful men in expensive suits. After watching how you effortlessly dismantled Trent and Marcus today, I am absolutely certain that you are the exact person I have been looking for to lead my team." Elias reached into his breast pocket and produced a sleek, matte black business card. He held it out to me. "I am officially offering you the position of lead financial investigator at my firm in New York. The starting salary is 4 times what you are currently making, accompanied by a comprehensive benefits package, full relocation assistance, and an equity stake after your first year of successful audits. You will report directly to me, and you will have absolute authority over a dedicated team of junior analysts. What do you say, Sienna? Are you ready to leave this toxic city behind and step into the power you truly deserve?" I looked down at the black business card resting in his palm. This was the ultimate payoff. This was the universe rewarding me for enduring years of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and relentless gaslighting. I had walked into this courthouse expecting to fight for my basic dignity against a family that viewed me as a disposable cashier. Now I was being offered an elite executive position by one of the most respected legal minds in the entire country. I reached out and took the business card, slipping it smoothly into my designer bag. I extended my right hand toward the formidable judge. "I accept your offer, Elias," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. I look forward to starting my new life in New York. Elias grasped my hand, giving it a firm, decisive shake. Excellent. My assistant will email you the formal contract this afternoon. Safe travels back to the city, Sienna. We have a lot of corrupt empires to tear down. With a final respectful nod, Elias Thorne turned and walked toward the elevator bank, his cane tapping a steady rhythm against the floor. I stood alone for a brief moment, adjusting the strap of my designer bag on my shoulder. I turned my head slightly, casting one final glance over my shoulder at the devastation I was leaving behind. The scene in the lobby remained a portrait of total collapse. Eleanor was still slumped on the wooden bench, weeping loudly over the loss of her precious Buckhead mansion and her ruined social status. Jada was aggressively shaking Trent by his shoulders, screaming at the disbarred lawyer who had destroyed their luxurious lifestyle. Marcus was still curled on the floor, a completely broken, destitute man, facing a very long federal prison sentence. They were drowning in the toxic consequences of their own overwhelming arrogance. I did not feel any pity. I turned and walked outside, totally free. 6 months can change the entire trajectory of a human life when you finally stop carrying the dead weight of other people's expectations. The crisp, invigorating autumn air of Manhattan whipped through my hair as I stepped out of my chauffeured car and walked toward the towering glass skyscraper that housed my new reality. The heavy, suffocating humidity of Atlanta was nothing but a distant memory now. I swiped my Platinum Access badge at the security turnstile and rode the private elevator up to the top floor of Elias Thorne's private equity firm. The polished mahogany doors opened to reveal a sprawling corner office with panoramic views of the New York City skyline. My name was engraved on a thick glass plaque resting on a massive marble desk. Lead Financial Investigator. It was not a title handed to me through nepotism or marriage. It was an empire I had conquered with my own intellect and absolute resilience. While I was busy building my new life at the very top of the financial world, the family that had desperately tried to bury me was currently suffocating under the debris of their own collapsed dynasty. The federal authorities had moved with devastating speed and surgical precision. Trent Harrison, the arrogant corporate attorney who had mocked my working-class background, was officially disbarred by the American Bar Association. The offshore accounts I had uncovered during my forensic audit provided the Federal Bureau of Investigation with all the leverage they needed to launch a massive criminal probe. Trent was sitting in a federal holding facility without bail, awaiting trial for aggravated money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The elite partners at Sterling and Vance had publicly denounced him, severing all ties to protect their own reputations. He had gone from wearing custom Italian suits to wearing an orange jumpsuit entirely stripped of the unearned privilege he had wielded like a weapon. Jada, who had spent years treating me like an uneducated peasant, was now drowning in a sea of public humiliation and mounting legal debt. With Trent's assets entirely frozen by the federal government, her luxurious lifestyle vanished overnight. She was forced to sell her designer handbags, her diamond jewelry, and her sports car just to afford a basic defense attorney. She filed for divorce, in a desperate attempt to distance herself from Trent's criminal enterprise, but the damage was already permanently done. The elite social circles she desperately clung to slammed their doors directly in her face. Marcus fared even worse. My ex-husband was completely bankrupt, his credit score entirely destroyed, and his professional reputation burned to absolute ash. When the federal authorities seized his remaining assets to repay the church investors he had embezzled from, Marcus was left with absolutely nothing. He could not secure a loan. He could not rent a decent apartment. He could not even land an entry-level corporate job because his name was highly toxic across the entire city of Atlanta. The man who had strutted through life pretending to be a brilliant, untouchable chief executive officer was now working as a shift supervisor at a discount retail store on the outskirts of the city. He spent his days folding cheap shirts and dealing with angry customers earning minimum wage just to afford groceries. There were no luxury cars. There were no lavish dinners. There were no mistresses eager to spend his stolen cash. He was completely isolated, trapped in a miserable reality of his own making. But perhaps the most poetic justice of all belonged to my former mother-in-law, Eleanor. The proud, image-obsessed matriarch had lost the one thing she valued above all: human connection, her social standing. When the bank foreclosed on the ancestral Buckhead mansion, Eleanor was abruptly forced to move into a tiny, cramped apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood. Her spectacular downfall became the primary source of gossip for the entire Atlanta elite. The prestigious church committees she had once ruled with an iron fist politely requested her immediate resignation. Her exclusive sorority alumni network completely stopped returning her phone calls. The country club formally revoked her membership. Eleanor was entirely shunned by the wealthy Black society she had worshipped for her entire life. She spent her days sitting in a tiny living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes she had not even bothered to unpack, bitterly mourning the loss of a legacy she had allowed her corrupt son to completely destroy. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt for the devastation they brought upon themselves. I had offered Marcus a chance to be an honest man. I had offered his family my loyalty, my hard-earned money, and my genuine support. They chose to reward my dedication with profound disrespect and deceit. They thought they could push me into a dark corner and force me to surrender my dignity. They were completely wrong. A soft knock on my heavy glass door pulled me from my reflections. Elias Thorne stepped into my spacious office, leaning comfortably on his silver-handled wooden cane. He offered a warm, highly impressed smile as he placed a new, thick stack of confidential financial documents onto my desk. "We have a new corporate acquisition target, Sienna," Elias announced, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute professional respect. "The board suspects their chief financial officer is hiding millions in undeclared liabilities through a network of shell companies in Europe. I need you to tear their ledgers apart and find the absolute truth." I looked down at the fresh files, then out the expansive window at the glittering, endless skyline of Manhattan. The pain, the betrayal, and the agonizing struggle of my past were entirely gone, replaced by an unshakable, profound sense of inner peace. I smiled, reaching out to open the very first folder. "I will have the entire network dismantled by Friday morning," I promised confidently. Elias nodded his approval, leaving me alone in my beautiful corner office, completely free,